My name is Naoise Sweeney and I'm a Professor of Greek Archaeology. Welcome to my exp. If you have a look at a map of the ancient Greek world, it's much bigger than the borders of the modern nation-state of Greece. The ancient Greek world, it stretches from Spain in the west to Cyprus in the east, and from the Crimea in the north to Cyrenaica in Libya in the south. It's truly a very expansive and geographically fragmented entity. When we look at this map, it's very clear that migration is a crucial part in what made the ancient Greek world. It must have been crucial in the way this world came together, but it also must have been crucial in keeping this world linked and connected. So the ancient Greek world must, just from looking at its map, have been a place characterized by human migration, human mobility throughout all of its history. So it's been a major focus of my research to try and understand the nature of these human mobilities, both the mobility that created the ancient Greek world in the first place, but also the kinds of mobilities that held it together over the course of its history. 5 years ago, I started a new research project. It's called Migration and the Making of the Ancient Greek World, or MIGMAG for short. And my aim in this project was to investigate the kinds of mobilities that created the ancient Greek world, that gave it the initial shape that we see on the map today. I wanted to understand how the Greek world became so geographically expansive, to understand how Greeks got to these various far-flung locations, and then what held them together afterwards. My research begins at about 1100 BCE in the early Iron Age. At this point in the Mediterranean, this is an environment which is extremely decentralized. There's no large political states, there's no empires, and so there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of fluidity, and there's a lot of people moving around. In this period, there's no clear idea of a center or a periphery. There's no clear idea of people necessarily moving out in a diasporic sense. It's much more chaotic. We're much more thinking about people moving around in a kind of Brownian motion, almost without clear directionality. And what's interesting is that over the course of 2 or 3 centuries, the directionality emerges, and we start to find emerging centers and emerging peripheries. What I think is particularly interesting is the processes through which the centers emerge as centers and the peripheries emerge as peripheries. The ancient Greek world at this time, in the classical period, it's not a single political entity. It is not comprised of any kind of contiguous territories. Instead, it's made up of hundreds, actually more than 1,000, individual autonomous communities. Many of these are city-states, famously known as the Greek polis, but some of these might be territorial states too. What is unclear is what holds together all of these diverse groups. They're not held together by any common political institutions. They're not held together by any common laws. Instead, what they seem to share are cultural commonalities in terms of language, in terms of ritual, in terms of ways of life, ways of doing things, but also in terms of their idea of a shared history, the stories and mythology that they shared too. So the ancient Greek world at this time, it's a world held together by shared culture rather than by any kind of formal political structures. We tend to think of migration as something that happens one-off or in discrete moments in time, such as the idea of a diasporic expansion of Greekness. We're actually dealing with a situation where migration is much more ongoing, much more cyclical, much more normal, much more everyday. What actually creates the ancient Greek world is not a diasporic expansion outwards, but instead a cultural convergence whereby interacting communities look inwards and then create this idea of a shared common Greekness. What we see in the archaeological record are groups of people beginning to partake in and embrace Mediterranean-style cultures and customs and ways of life. And so it's those ways of doing things, so styles of eating, styles of drinking, ways of worshipping the gods, which are beginning to show cultural convergence first. And then these more explicit statements of identity and origin and ethnicity, these are things which come later. So what the archaeology shows us is that culture comes first and identity follows after. I think if there's one thing we can take from this research, it's that migration is normal. It is a normal state of being for humans to move around at different scales, not necessarily long-distance migration over huge distances, but a general ongoing sense of humans shifting places, humans being mobile. This is absolutely normal for humans. I think what we can learn is that whether you call something migration is just a label. At the point at which it's unusual enough to be labelled as migration rather than as mobility, this is something which very much changes over time. And what we might call a migration movement might have been something quite normal and everyday for someone in antiquity, and vice versa. The first lesson is that human mobility always happened. It's always ongoing, it never stops, it's a normal condition of humanity. And the second lesson is that how we understand those mobilities is quite culturally specific. The same movement might be understood as an unusual form of migration in one period of time, but it might just be a normal part of everyday life in another. If there's one misconception I'd like to correct, I'd like people to be aware that migration is not new. That people have always moved around, that mobility is a fundamental part of the human condition.